My name is Clara Reed, and until last winter, my family believed I was the disappointment they could laugh about behind closed doors. They weren't entirely wrong. I had spent the last 3 years living paycheck to paycheck, running a small animal clinic in a rented strip mall corner that smelled like antiseptic and regret. But none of that mattered the morning the lawyer called. "Miss Reed, your grandfather's estate will be read next Thursday at 10 a.m. in Rivers and Coin Chambers," he said. "Please bring identification." The tone was professional, polite, neutral enough not to alarm. What he didn't realize was that my stomach had already flipped. Because in our family, estate reading meant fireworks over other people's ashes. Grandpa Henry Reed had been the solitary branch of our wealth tree. A quiet man with calloused palms and an engineer's brain, he had built heavy machinery plants across the Midwest in the 80s. When he retired, he sold most of them, kept one in Chicago, and vanished into his coastal farmhouse in Maine. My father liked to call him the relic who never learned leverage. What he meant was the old man who refused to sell his soul for profit. At Sunday dinners, Dad would joke, "Henry will probably leave Clara his toolbox. Suits her income bracket." And everyone, Mom, my older brother Evan, even my little sister Sophie, laughed. People laugh hardest when cruelty feels like tradition. The morning of the will reading arrived almost theatrically gray. Fog rolled over the ocean horizon. Gulls screamed like stifled conscience. I flew into Boston, rented the cheapest hybrid I could find, and drove north to the small law office perched between 2 aging bookstores. Inside sat my entire family dressed as if the session were a red carpet event. Mom shimmered under pearls. Evan scrolled through emails wearing an expensive boredom, and Sophie, fashion influencer in training, whispered into her phone, pretending to document grief for her followers. Then there was me, in a navy blazer that still smelled faintly of cat medicine. Dad's eyebrows lifted. "You came," he muttered. "Didn't think you could afford the flight." "Grandpa paid for it," I replied. Apparently he wanted everyone here. That shut him up for at least 10 seconds. When Mr. Rivers, the attorney, entered, the room hushed like church. He placed a brown folder on the polished table, adjusted his glasses, and read the list. Each name, each allocation. To my parents, a summer estate in Vermont, value roughly $1.3 million. To Evan, stocks in Henry Machinery. Letty, to Sophie, a trust fund of $500,000 for creative pursuits. To my granddaughter, Clara Reed. He paused, glancing up. I leave the key to locker 1173 at the Old Harbor Bank, and the following note to be read aloud. He unfolded a single parchment. "Clara, everyone else in this room took care of the fortune I earned. You were the only one who came to visit me after that stroke. Don't listen to laughter. It's the sound of empty pockets pretending to be full. Go see your inheritance yourself, Grandpa." Silence. Then the whispering started. Mom's voice sliced through first. "Locker keys? This must be some antique map nonsense." Evan chuckled. "Maybe he left her seashells. Sentimental junk." The lawyer cleared his throat. "That concludes the reading." On my way back to the parking lot, Mom caught my arm. "Don't get your hopes up. Clara, Daddy loved you, sure. But he wasn't thinking clearly those last months." "Maybe," I said. "But clarity isn't hereditary." I left her blinking at my back. The Old Harbor Bank looked almost abandoned. Gray brick, brass doors, the kind of building that hid history under layers of polite dust. Locker 1173 sat deep in the basement vault. When the clerk opened it for me, his expression changed from bored to startled. Inside wasn't jewelry or a box of love letters. It was a small leather-bound notebook and a set of 5 metal tags, each engraved with numbers and a company stamp, HR Holdings, LLC. At the bottom lay a single access card marked Owner Authorization. The note on the first page read, "If they called you foolish, prove them accurate by forgiving them later. But first, go see what they laughed at. HR." I didn't yet realize my grandfather had just handed me the entrance, key to a hidden empire. I left the bank clutching the notebook like it was radioactive. Outside, wind rolled off the harbor, tangling my hair across my face. The seagulls overhead screamed like bad omens, or maybe alarms telling me this story wasn't as small as everyone assumed. Inside my car, I flipped open the notebook again. Grandpa's handwriting was the same half-print, half-cursive script that used to label every toolbox in his garage. Precise, stubborn. HR Holdings, LLC, subsidiary index. 1. Blue Quarry Shipping Co., Maine. 2. Iron Bridge Power Consultancy, Illinois. 3. Reed Storage and Transport, Texas. 4. Everline Machinery Parts, Ohio. 5. Harbor Renewable Technologies, Oregon. At the bottom, in faded ink, all registered under beneficiary to C1173. My heart stuttered. C for Clara. Beneficiary meant whichever company these were. I was listed somewhere in official paperwork, not as token heir but as owner. It took 2 hours of phone calls and Google searches to confirm what I was seeing. HR Holdings was more than a memory. Each subsidiary still existed, quiet but profitable. They weren't under Reed Enterprises like Dad's public companies. They were private, separated by layers of legal walls no one in my family could penetrate without that access card. Grandpa hadn't retired into oblivion. He'd spent his final decade rebuilding his empire, just off the books. I sat in the rental car until my legs tingled, staring at the water until the cold burned my cheeks. For 13 years, they'd teased him for playing with rusted factories. He'd smiled and let them, all the while turning rust into gold. And apparently, I was the only one he trusted with the truth. That night, I checked into a cheap coastal motel where the bedsheet smelled of salt and pine sol. I ordered takeout lobster roll and spread the documents across the bed, like a treasure map. Each metal tag matched a warehouse address. Each address matched a business registration ID. But the last one, Harbor Renewable Technologies, Oregon, caught my eye. A recent press release said they'd won a small federal contract for researching microturbines. Estimated valuation, $82 million. My hand froze on the page. $82 million, hidden behind a name none of them had ever pronounced. I laughed out loud, too loud for the tiny room. Some truths arrive as laughter when tears don't know how. The next morning I returned to the law office to confirm what I'd found. Mr. Rivers looked mildly startled to see me so soon. Miss Reed? Is something wrong? Just verification, I said, placing the tags on his desk. Can you tell me whether these companies exist within your grandfather's charter? He adjusted his glasses, flipped through a register, then blinked and sat back. Good Lord, yes. And these aren't small. HR Holdings filed royalties, leases, and dividends through a silent foundation in your name 5 years ago. I grinned, silent being the key word. He nodded slowly. I believe your grandfather wanted security for someone who didn't chase public attention. He succeeded. By the time I drove back toward Boston, my inbox pinged with messages from Dad. Dad, heard you're still in Maine. You got the key, right? Let's talk. Maybe split whatever scrapbooks he left. Mom, please call. There's no reason to be defensive. Grandpa was senile. Don't embarrass the family chasing ghosts. I ignored them both, because by then I was standing at the rental counter asking for a different car, one that could make a 2,000-mile drive to Oregon. Late on the 5th day, Oregon welcomed me with rain that smelled like wet pine and freedom. The address from the tag led to a glass and steel building outside Portsmouth, coincidentally standing on what used to be a shipyard. A security officer in Navy uniform stopped me at the gate. Ma'am, facility access is for authorized personnel only. I slid him the metal key tag and access card. He scanned them, eyes widening. 1 moment. Minutes later, a woman in a lab coat came down the corridor to meet me. Dr. Evans, she introduced herself. I help manage Harbor Renewable Technologies. You must be Ms. Reed. I am. She smiled like someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Your grandfather told us to expect his successor 1 year after his death. I assume that's now? I nodded, stunned. You mean I've been the owner for a year without knowing? Technically, for 3. The profits have been reinvested in research per his instructions. She paused, then added, Would you like to see what you own? As I followed her through rows of whirring microturbines, I realized how carefully he'd disguised brilliance as madness. Grandpa hadn't built an empire for money. He'd built it for legacy, and he'd trusted his black sheep granddaughter to keep it honest. I stood in the middle of his machines and felt something I'd never felt at a Reed family dinner, belonging. Dr. Evans led me into a glass conference room overlooking the turbine floor. The ocean shimmered just beyond, framed by steel and sun. Your grandfather designed these models himself, she said, resting both hands on the table. He believed small power belongs to small communities. We turned fishing towns into energy exporters. I looked through the glass, speechless. He never mentioned this. He acted like retirement meant crossword puzzles and birdwatching. Dr. Evans smiled. He enjoyed pretending, said it kept greedy people away. That line hit deeper than intended. Kept greedy people away. He hadn't been hiding genius. He'd been hiding it from my family. Over the next 2 hours, she walked me through everything. Contracts, patents, clean water projects tied to each subsidiary. They were decades ahead of schedule. When she finally placed a folder in front of me, she said, "There's one thing he insisted be done in person. Distribution rights must remain under your signature only. He specified that you should wait until the day your father contacts you to make you reasonable." He predicted that moment exactly. I laughed softly. He always did know the family calendar. Outside, the clouds lowered, turning the glass walls into dull mirrors. My reflection looked older, determined. That evening, I booked a red-eye back to Chicago, where my parents lived in their oversized, eco-friendly mansion surrounded by SUVs. I didn't tell them I was coming. For once, they could choke on surprise. When I rang the doorbell, my father himself opened the door, surprised enough to forget arrogance for 3 seconds. "Clara, well, that's unexpected. I'm consistent that way," I said, stepping past him. Mom appeared, glossy and tense, like a news anchor after camera cut. "Did you come to gloat about your locker key?" I set my bag on the foyer marble deliberately. "No, Mom. I came to return something your father-in-law left behind." Perspective. They exchanged a glance that only business partners in marriage can manage. Dad cleared his throat. "We talked to Rivers. He said the companies you mentioned are rumor. Don't embarrass yourself chasing technicalities." "Rumor?" I opened my tablet and clicked a file. "Funny rumor then. Look." The home screen filled with figures, quarterly reports, projected profits, a federal energy award bearing HR Holdings LLC. Owner, Clara Reed. Their silence was priceless. Dad stammered first. That can't be accurate." "It is. Grandpa's toolbox produces 8.2 million annually." Mom regained language. "You're exaggerating." I met her eyes. "You should know exaggeration. You raised it." For a long moment, the only sound was the clock on the staircase wall. Then Dad forced a brittle smile. "Well, at least it stays in the family. When you merge with Reed Enterprises, we can streamline operations." I laughed so loudly the dog upstairs barked. "Merge? You spent 20 years treating Grandpa like a punchline and me like his echo. Now you want access?" "Clara, be reasonable. Think of legacy." "I am. His legacy, not yours." Mom's voice dripped frost. "After all we've done, this is how you repay us?" I turned to her. "You did plenty. You taught me how it feels to stand alone and still stay upright. I owe you that resilience." They didn't have a reply. When I left, the sound of my heels on their marble floor felt like applause arriving from the future. Back at my apartment that night, exhaustion crashed in. Triumph isn't peace. It's just proof. I washed my face, sat by the window, and opened Grandpa's notebook again. Between 2 pages, a sliver of new paper slid loose. It was an old photograph, him and me at the machine shop, both in goggles, both laughing. On the back he'd written, "Let them build towers. You build engines. Theirs stop when approval runs out. Yours keep working." I pressed that photo against my chest until breathing evened out. Over the next month, messages poured in from relatives who had once forgotten my number. Evan wrote first. "Heard you took over Grandpa's projects. We should talk business." I wrote back 2 words, "Not available." Then Mom texted heart emojis, the universal currency of people who believe affection erases history. I didn't reply. But one voicemail I kept replaying came from Grandpa's former assistant, Mrs. Daly. Her voice trembled with affection. He said, "When you find it all, you'll finally see the difference between inheritance and purpose." Purpose, that word lodged in my mind like a lit candle. Purpose changes how you wake up. When someone hands you a fortune built from honesty, you start guarding integrity more fiercely than interest rates. I resigned from the small clinic 2 weeks later. People asked if I was moving up. I told them the truth. I'm moving inward. Then I flew back to Oregon to learn my empire. Harbor Renewable Technologies looked different when you arrived as its owner. Employees straightened, conversations paused, and Dr. Evans called me ma'am, which made me laugh out loud. "Please keep calling me Clara," I said. Over the following days, I absorbed everything: blueprint revisions, power grid simulations, budgets that glowed green instead of red. My grandfather's name still sat on half the patents. My own was quietly printed underneath. Successor curator. The word curator felt right. He hadn't left me a company to exploit. He'd left me a museum of his beliefs. But prosperity attracts noise. 3 weeks later, an invitation arrived from my father, not handwritten, of course, sent through a lawyer, formal letterhead, family business meeting, potential merger opportunity, confidential. The irony nearly broke the paper. I forwarded it to my own attorney with a single instruction: observe. Don't interfere unless they try deception. Still, I showed up. Call it closure or curiosity. They'd rented a downtown Chicago boardroom, the kind designed to intimidate. Dad stood at the head of the table, a spreadsheet glowing behind him. Clara, he greeted with a performative warmth. This is all in good faith. With Reed Enterprises' reach and your green tech innovation, we can dominate the market. Mom chimed in, tone rehearsed. Imagine headlines, father and daughter. Revolutionize energy, it's poetic. Poetry requires truth, I said, not convenience. Evan spun his pen. Look, you've got assets, we've got infrastructure. Grandpa's little experiment can finally go global. You need our umbrella. I folded my hands. I already have thunder. They didn't laugh. I continued before they could regroup. Grandpa didn't build these projects to rival your factories. He built them to replace them. Carbon-free production, scalable turbines, community ownership. If you're asking for partnership, it's philanthropy, not profit. Mom's smile splintered. You can't be serious. Completely, I said. In honor of him, 20% of Harbor. Renewables annual yield will go back into education grants for engineers who can't afford college. That's my priority now. Dad leaned forward, eyes hardening. You're throwing away millions. No, I said quietly. I'm redistributing greed. The silence that followed felt like every storm I'd ever endured finally hearing itself echo. Evan pushed his chair back. You've lost your mind. Maybe, I said, but I found Grandpa's. They left first because power, when denied its favorite audience, loses appetite. That night, back in my hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights looked like constellations on water. I called Dr. Evans. Let's double the community investment fund, I told her. You sure? That'll shake a few boards. I grinned.
I'm used to tremors.
Next morning, the press release went public. Harbor Renewables expands legacy grants to 50 local students annually. Founded by Henry Reed, sustainably led by granddaughter Clara Reed. 4 hours later, my phone exploded. Calls, texts, emails. Half congratulations, half disguised fury. I turned all notifications off and drove to the countryside. The car windows were down, wind threading through my hair, phone silent for once. I reached an old roadside diner Grandpa used to love. Same neon sign, same smell of burned coffee and sugar. Inside, the waitress recognized me instantly. You're Henry's girl, ain't you? He used to brag about you, said you were the only one who could change a tire without wanting a trophy. I laughed until tears blurred the napkin I used. The compliment was ugly and perfect, just like him. When I left, I looked at the mural above the counter, a painting of the old man himself, donated posthumously by friends of Henry Reed. A plaque read, "Innovation belongs to everyone brave enough to be laughed at first." I traced the words with my fingertip. He'd written them somewhere before. Now they belonged to me. Driving back toward the airport, I replayed everything from that ugly will reading to this moment. Every family insult, every mocked dream had built its own engine, and I was finally the one steering. I whispered into the steering wheel, half prayer, half oath. Grandpa, I won't run an empire. I'll run a revolution. 6 months passed before I saw my family again. Not by choice, by reunion. Grandpa's Memorial Foundation invited all surviving Reeds to a dedication ceremony at the old factory where it all began. The same building where he had spent nights bent over blueprints. Now housed classrooms, maker labs, and 3D printers sponsored by his energy company. My company. I arrived early. The scent of machine oil had been replaced by fresh paint and possibility. Students hung banners reading, "Future grew here." It felt like reconciliation between iron and intellect. As I toured the hall, my heels clicked across the same concrete floor that once carried the weight of his dreams. When I reached the stage, I saw Mom and Dad sitting in the front row. They looked smaller, not older, smaller. Success has a way of changing room sizes for people who measure worth by walls. When the host called me to speak, cameras flashed. I adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. Henry Reed was a man who built power out of patience. He believed machines should work for people, not the other way around. He also believed laughter isn't cruelty's symptom, it's its disguise. I paused. The reporters leaned closer. My mother hid behind sunglasses. Today we're launching the Reed Innovation Fellowship, full scholarships for students who've been told they're not practical enough to matter. Grandpa used to say that impossible ideas simply lack accountants. Well, I have accountants now. Laughter rippled through the room, the right kind this time. After the ribbon cutting, Dad approached me while guests drifted away. He looked like someone fighting statistics. "You've done something remarkable," he admitted. "We didn't expect all this." "I know," I said. He cleared his throat. "Your mother thinks we should start over. There's family reputation to rebuild, public expectations." "Dad," I interrupted, "you can stop worrying about reputation. Legacy does that for you when it's real." He opened his mouth and shut it again. For the first time, silence looked good on him. Mom never spoke to me at all. She just stood beside him, holding the same pearl clutch she'd once used as armor. Maybe that was her version of goodbye. Later that night, I stayed behind after everyone left. The lights over the machines dimmed automatically, leaving only the low hum of turbines kept for demonstration. I walked among them until I reached the far corner. A small exhibit labeled Founder's Desk. It was Grandpa's original work table. On it sat a photo stand, newly added, him and me when I was 8. Grease on our hands, joy in our faces. Underneath, engraved into brass, a quote I'd never heard before. "Build for truth. Inherit for courage." That line alone was worth more than every dollar transferred to my account. Outside, the air carried the smell of cold iron and night jasmine. I looked up at the factory's lit windows forming the letters HR. Henry Reed, Renewable Revelation, all three now mean the same thing. My phone buzzed with a new message from Shay Evans, the CEO of a nonprofit we'd supported last month. "We just powered a library in Nepal using your microturbines. Thought you'd like to know." I grinned, texted back a plain emoji, and slipped the phone into my pocket. Somewhere, every lesson Grandpa ever drilled into gears was spinning new light into the world. When I drove home, the road shimmered under rain. I turned on the headlights and thought about the girl who once sat in a main parking lot holding a bank key, mocked by her own blood. She had no idea she was holding an empire not made of money, but meaning. At a stoplight, I whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." A car behind me honked. Life keeps moving. Ghosts simply learn new ways to ride shotgun. Back in Oregon, the work never slowed. We expanded to 20 rural grids, partnered with universities, and employed veterans who needed second chances. Sometimes reporters asked for my secret. I always answered, "Small machines, big forgiveness." Because forgiveness was what he'd hidden along with the profit, the power to choose better without seeking permission. A year later, on the anniversary of his death, I returned to the coast alone. The sea was restless, skies metallic blue, waves crashing exactly where his ashes had been scattered. I left his notebook on a rock, pages fluttering until they got wet. It was time for the story to belong entirely to the tide. When I walked away, I didn't look back. Some people spend their lives demanding acknowledgement. Others inherit it quietly and turn it into electricity. Grandpa taught me both ways, but I chose the second. And if anyone asks what Henry Reed really left his family, I'll tell them this. He left the greedy their silence. He left me the future.